Hello everybody and welcome to the WRESTLEDUDE YouTube channel here. I am Jacob as always, and today I have a pretty lengthy video. Probably it's a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. I've had this idea kind of brewing. I've always been wanting to do it. The problem has been I've just been preoccupied with other video ideas and stuff going on in personal life, but now the time has finally come to talk about NXT, and more importantly talk about NXT in depth and my thoughts on if NXT is still good, or is it still as good as it was a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever. And throughout these notes I'm just stating my opinion, and I guess this video is more of just me trying to kind of vent my frustrations recently with NXT, and I'm just trying to put it out there, and maybe you agree with it, maybe you disagree with it, but just hear it from me. I'm not trying to make you angry. I'm just trying to point out what my thoughts are on NXT recently, and you know, see maybe if we relate on some things, if we relate on nothing, if we relate on everything, who knows. But before we get started, make sure you leave a thumbs up on the video if you do go on to enjoy it, and comment below, is there anything on NXT that you feel like has made you enjoy the show more or enjoy the show less recently, in recent years? Just let me know in the comments, and at least try to be civil about it. You know, don't be throwing hate words and stuff like that out there. But I want to get into this, and I kind of want to try and pinpoint. This is where I'm pinpointing where NXT really made a big change, and I would pinpoint it as once it moved to the USA Network. Once it moved off of the WWE Network and it became on the USA Network. Like, even from like the last show of NXT, I have the list of matches that happened on the last show of NXT on the USA, or on the WWE Network. It was 9/11/19. That was the last show that NXT did where it was on the WWE Network, and the matches that we had for it were Damian Priest versus Boa. Johnny Gargano addressed his future with NXT, and that ended up being him announcing that he was staying in NXT. And then we had Pete Dunne versus Angel Garza, and we had Raul Mendoza versus Cameron Grimes, and then we had Rhea Ripley versus Shayna Baszler for the NXT Women's Championship. That wasn't the matchup where Rhea Ripley won the championship. That was later on in December. This one, she won by disqualification. And then we had a little promo from the Undisputed Era setting up Roderick Strong versus Velveteen Dream for the NXT North American Championship the following week on NXT, which would be part of NXT's first night on the USA Network. I would pinpoint this as kind of the point where NXT started getting a little bit, just slightly out of where I enjoyed NXT from in the first place. And kind of the big reason for that is because, you know, WWE has always presented NXT as this like underground, you know, like exclusive thing where it's like this hardcore base of fans, and then all of a sudden it's being produced and shown to this wider audience that, you know, it would be like if Fight Club was broadcast on live TV with like a bunch of fancy graphics and stuff like that. It just kind of takes away from the whole nuance of the thing. You know, if you promote NXT as this whole underground thing where it's like an exclusive group of people come to watch it, but then you show it to like this big wide audience, then it kind of just mishmashes with the whole thing. And I know the whole reason was, and the whole idea of it was like, well, now everyone's going to know about this. Now we're opening it up and everybody can watch this. But I don't know. I just feel like something special kind of got lost there. You know, tuning into the WWE Network and watching it there. But, I mean, I guess it's just a matter of business moving it onto the USA Network. But like I said, that was kind of a smaller thing. And once it moved to the USA Network, it seemed like the whole presentation changed for me. There were these new camera shots. You know, there was the whole balcony thing where they would do interviews and promos and stuff like that. Filming it live instead of doing it in batched tapings, which I kind of feel like was kind of another cool thing that I liked about NXT, was they did a whole batch of tapings, And in those times, you could kind of look at the spoilers or stuff like that, and this crazy stuff would be leaking out, and you would be even more excited to watch the show in some cases because you're like, oh my god, I can't wait to see this on TV live. Even recently, here in July 2021, when I'm filming this, they've filmed 2 weeks of TV because of the Olympics. They've been kicked off of the USA Network, so they're filming 2 weeks of NXT TV to put on Sci-Fi. And already some fun stuff from that little batch of tapings has come out, and it kind of makes me interested to watch NXT in the coming weeks. But yeah, just from that first show, the new graphics and the new camera angles and stuff that they added to it just kind of seemed kind of strange to me, especially since I didn't really think that anything was really broken with NXT. It seemed like they were just adding new stuff for the sake of adding new stuff, since it's a new era of NXT. We're going live on the USA Network. We've got 2 hours now instead of 1 hour, and I feel like that's kind of another big reason as to why NXT kind of took a nosedive once it moved to the USA Network with 2 hours, because one of NXT's biggest things about it is its takeover events, and the best thing about the takeover events is the matches run really, really long. They get a lot of time, and usually the crowds give them a really great reaction. When they moved NXT onto the USA Network and they gave it 2 hours, that meant that quite a few matches on NXT, where normally in that 1 hour span, a lot of the NXT matches from back then were fairly short. They had a lot of really good stuff to them, but they were fairly short, which meant that the takeover matches felt really, really awesome because they were going super, super long. But if you have 2 hours of TV and some of the matches from NXT are running like 15-20 minutes, then you have the takeover events that have matches that also run around 15 to 20 minutes, then everything starts to feel like kind of a mini takeover, which on one hand is good, but on the other hand, it kind of dilutes the whole big feeling of a takeover, where you're doing all the crazy awesome long matches on TV, but then you're also doing crazy long matches on a takeover. Everything starts to feel super awesome, and then after a while it all just kind of stops feeling super awesome, if you get what I mean. That's kind of the only way I can explain it, but that's, again, another kind of small nitpick. I will say this, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree with me on this part at least. The one big thing that has happened recently with NXT, where it really took a nosedive, and really this applies to all pro wrestling, is when COVID started. When COVID started in early 2020, it was probably the biggest nosedive that NXT had taken in a long, long time. Like, really ever since, I can't remember what year it was, but there was a year where, NXT's whole roster was, gutted and moved to Raw or SmackDown, and there was, especially their women's division, I remember that being a big critique a few years ago. Maybe it was 2018, 2017, something like that. But when COVID started, that was probably the biggest nosedive, and it's because NXT's matches are great. And what makes them even better is when you have that loud crowd and audience at Full Sail, or the takeover crowds, to react to these awesome matches, to have these awesome moments captured and seen by an audience. And when COVID started, they filmed everything at Full Sail and then the PC, and they filmed it in front of nobody. And even when they had the PC recruits in the audience, I just didn't feel like when they had the NXT PC recruits kind of cheering in the audience the same way they did for Raw and SmackDown in the PC. I just felt like it wasn't really the same as a normal audience, because a normal crowd organically cheers and boos people. The people that were PC recruits, it just kind of definitely felt like they were told, okay, when Adam Cole comes out, you boo him. When so-and-so comes out, you cheer him. So, it didn't really feel that organic. Because, sometimes in the PC or Full Sail with the Full Sail crowd, sometimes they do cheer the bad guys, and sometimes they do boo the good guys. So, it really lost out on kind of its whole organic, cheering and booing for me with that kind of an audience. And I will say, I did put this in here in my notes, I will say the whole AEW versus NXT Wednesday Night Wars didn't really help NXT at all, because it did make a large chunk of its audience feel like they kind of had to pick a side. I know that's really stupid to talk about, like, you know, in this whole war, like saying you have to choose a side. You have to be either AEW or you have to be NXT. You can't be both. I know the general consensus is that a lot of people really were both, and, you know, maybe there was a big audience group that seemingly did pick between AEW and NXT, and a lot of people picked or prioritized AEW over NXT. I will admit, myself included, I prioritized AEW over NXT. I didn't cut out NXT. I still watched NXT. I would watch AEW live. I still do. I watch AEW Dynamite live, and then the next morning I watch NXT. So, yeah, that's probably another reason as to why. Because all throughout the whole time that AEW and NXT were both on Wednesday nights, AEW beat NXT a lot of weeks on TV, you know, with the whole ratings thing. I never really paid a lot of attention. I would see it like pop up in my Twitter timeline from people that I follow that liked the tweets and stuff like that. But I never really paid too much attention to that kind of stuff. But I would definitely see that as one of the things that kind of hurts NXT, is kind of a lot of its audience like being pulled in two different directions. And NXT and WWE set up NXT to go against AEW. You can try to deny it or not, but I mean, they tried to counter program them a ton. I mean, ever since we've heard stories from, who is it, Killian Dane or whatever, saying that, yeah, some of the guys in the back in NXT would watch AEW while the show was going on. They had weekly specials coming out like Great American Bash and Halloween Havoc to try and counter program AEW. There's no denying it. I'm sure if Triple H was hooked up to a lie detector test or he had some sort of truth serum, I'm sure he would tell you that's exactly what they were doing. So yeah, there was just that whole war thing going on, and it definitely didn't help NXT's audience and kind of how people found the perception of NXT, when before NXT used to be cool, but ever since it went up against AEW and NXT started to do this whole counter-programming thing, they kind of just looked at it and were like, really, man, why are you trying to compete with AEW? Like, I get from a business standpoint, but it's like, we like you guys both. We don't like that you're trying to, you know, one-up this company instead of just trying to focus on yourself. But I will say AEW also needs to focus on themselves. A lot of people get mad at them for the constant shots at WWE, which I sort of agree with. But we'll move on to a different point. And one point that I do feel like has kind of changed up the way that NXT feels recently is, you know, in the past, things have been different, where recently a lot of talent like Johnny Gargano or Tommaso Ciampa or the Undisputed Era they're staying a lot longer in NXT than other superstars before, and it feels weird now, because NXT's whole thing for such a long time has been that it has a forever changing cast of wrestlers. You know, back in the day, it used to be Seth Rollins and Big E, and then it became Neville and Sami Zayn, and then it became Samoa Joe and Finn Balor, and now it's come around to Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. But the thing is, Gargano and Ciampa are staying there, and then you have wrestlers like Samoa Joe and Finn Balor that are even coming back to NXT. Breezango came back to NXT. It's just, that's one of the things that kind of feels weird, is that, you know, like, usually after a while you're like, okay, this person's story is done in NXT, they're going to move to Raw or SmackDown, and we're going to get introduced to new superstars we're going to invest in. And now it's Gargano and Ciampa and Undisputed Era and a bunch of other people are now kind of in NXT for the long haul, and so now NXT kind of has to work them around, kind of putting them into news stories and not feeling like they have senioritis, as a lot of people have called it, senioritis, where they kind of feel like they've been in NXT for so long. There's really nothing else that they can do in NXT, so they kind of just feel like they don't really need to be there anymore. Personally, I like that Gargano and Ciampa are still in NXT, and even Undisputed Era, especially ever since their breakup. I feel like that's going to give them all a lot of like new reign to kind of do new stories with. And you know, it just kind of feels different, you know, not having the whole changing cast of wrestlers on the TV program. But I wouldn't say it's a major thing. It was just kind of one of those things that makes me think, like, NXT really isn't what it used to be. Now, let's get back to 2020 and how NXT really took the nosedive with this, because it wasn't just the crowds missing that kind of made NXT take a nosedive. It was some of the creative decisions. And week to week, I would notice like some stuff, and some stuff was COVID related. You know, people would be taken away from tapings because they caught COVID or something like that, and creative decisions had to be changed. You know, I think there was a time period where some members of the Undisputed Era couldn't come. I know Kyle O'Reilly was one where he was gone for a long time due to, I think he was like asymptomatic or something like that, where he had a hard time breathing. I think he had asthma or something. I could definitely be wrong about that, where he just couldn't be at the Performance Center or the CWC or Full Sail while they were taping for a long time, and so they had to make creative changes with that, and a lot of stuff just kind of felt like it was changing week to week. You know, where NXT usually has stories set out and planned out months in advance, but you know, sometimes during this time period it kind of felt like there were points where it was on levels, not entirely, but on levels of like Raw and SmackDown writing, where things were being changed like the day of. You know, it kind of felt like that to me, and some of the storyline stuff just didn't really sit well with people. And this is my main example of it, was when the Speaking Out movement started back in 2020, and Velveteen Dream found himself a part of it. And while he was a part of this whole Speaking Out movement, he was also part of the main NXT title picture. He was in a feud with Adam Cole over the NXT Championship. And when your main feud features such a dark cloud looming over it, like the whole Speaking Out movement against Velveteen Dream, it's definitely going to make it hard for a lot of people to be entertained. And for a long time, no matter what Velveteen Dream did, it was always just this whole moment of everybody collectively like grabbing their shirt collars and tugging on it and giving the most awkward like expression to it, like, I really don't want to watch this. And I'm sure even some of the most diehard NXT fans kind of felt like changing the channel during some of that stuff. I know I definitely did, doing the reviews for some of the TakeOver events back then. Definitely was kind of awkward, and I know a lot of other wrestling YouTubers definitely felt that exact same way. So there was just a lot of creative stuff that kind of felt a little wishy-washy and random. Sticking with Velveteen Dream, I'll give an example of another type of creative decision that kind of went nowhere. There was a segment where Velveteen Dream was like cutting a promo, and then all of a sudden Dexter Lumis popped up behind him and left a drawing of Velveteen Dream and Dexter Lumis as the NXT Tag Team Champions. And that was seemingly teasing that Dream and Dexter Lumis were going to be a tag team and were possibly going to go after the tag team titles. That never came up again. It's just unlike NXT, really, to have these like storylines teased and then they just never go anywhere. And that was the first of it. Even more recently, you know, before Toni Storm was announced to move to SmackDown, she was seemingly set up to be in a match or a mini rivalry with Sarray. And then Toni Storm walked up to her and said, "No, I will not accept your challenge." I thought maybe that was just Toni Storm being a big tease, and then eventually we would get that matchup, but it was really no. Sarray or whatever is not getting the match with Toni Storm. Toni Storm is leaving for SmackDown. So even more recently, with decisions having to be changed for storyline reasons, even more recently, some stuff on NXT has been randomly changed. But you know, that's like I said, lots of weird decisions. This is another thing that I started to notice, especially in 2020. The NXT Tag Team titles really took a nosedive. I feel like they kind of became an afterthought. You know, they weren't defended on takeovers when usually they are, which was very weird. And I noticed they were kind of having kind of bland level like storylines. You know, it'd kind of just be like Tag Team A versus Tag Team B. You know, Tag Team B attacks Tag Team A some weeks or whatever like that. I don't really know what else could have been done to maybe make that better. I mean, obviously having them defended on takeovers would probably be a start, but I did really notice back then that the tag team titles kind of took a nosedive. Another thing, a lot of nosedives during 2020 for NXT. Another thing that definitely took a nosedive, and a lot of people will probably agree with this too, is the NXT Women's Division. And the main cause of this was from WrestleMania, Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair. And at WrestleMania, instead of losing to Rhea Ripley and putting her over as a hot talent to watch on NXT, Charlotte won the NXT Women's Championship to about 5 people applauding, probably, across the entire world. I know that number's probably definitely wrong. I'm sure a lot more people were cheering. But I'm sure the majority weren't happy to see it. And an even bigger majority probably weren't happy when Charlotte went to NXT and beat a lot of people, a lot of favorite people, fairly easily. And then she lost the title in a triple threat match without being pinned. And then she went back to Raw and acted like the title loss never really mattered to her in the first place. You know, she never really seemed that upset about it. And then eventually, like, right after that, she took time off for so long. So even then, that we come back to the point of drop storylines. When Rhea Ripley lost the title to Charlotte Flair, I remember Triple H doing an interview where he said, like, the loss to Charlotte would make sense in a few months' time. And we had to wait for it. It never went anywhere. Like, it never went anywhere. Charlotte lost the championship, and then Charlotte left. If he's talking about finally, like, a year or a year and a half later, Rhea Ripley coming to Raw, winning the Raw Women's Championship, and then her and Charlotte having the feud on Raw, if he's talking about that, then that's still horrible, because the stuff happening on Raw and the stuff that just happened at Money in the Bank was horrible. If he was saying, like, oh, it's basically like he told us, oh, you thought her winning at WrestleMania was bad. Trust me, just give it a few months' time. It gets a hell of a lot worse. But he was trying to make it seem like it was going to be something cool that happened, you know. I just say that whole thing with Charlotte as the NXT Women's Champion was really bad, just because in her time as NXT Women's Champion, she made no one feel like a big star. The only one that ever came close to feeling like a bit of a big star was when she was in a tag team match with Chelsea Green. And Chelsea Green was on her team, and Chelsea Green was on the winning team then. That was the slightest bit of rub that Charlotte Flair's entire NXT Women's Championship run got. And I did an entire separate video talking about Charlotte Flair, and if you guys do want to hear more about that, please, I encourage you to listen to that, but that's just my opinion, quick opinion on the whole Charlotte Flair thing and how I feel like it affected NXT. But we move on to a character debuting in NXT in the year of 2020, that being Karrion Kross. He debuted as the monster of NXT. He beat Tommaso Ciampa fairly quickly at TakeOver in Your House, and then he went on to win the NXT Championship from Keith Lee at TakeOver in what a lot of people agree was a pretty bad match. I thought it was fine for what it was looking back on it now, but it was a bad match by people's standards because of Karrion Kross's injury during that match. And the next episode on NXT, he had to vacate the title, and then Finn Balor became the champion afterwards. And ever since Karrion Kross came to NXT, a lot of people have quickly said that he doesn't fit in with NXT. You know, he's this big monstery guy. He's kind of like a Brock Lesnar type, where he wrestles this very brutal, like, methodical pace. You know, not as much as Randy Orton. A lot of people criticize Randy Orton for doing a lot of headlocks and, like, rest holds and stuff like that. Karrion Kross does a lot of, like, cool suplexes and strikes and judo and stuff like that. But compared to all the other wrestlers on NXT, like Johnny Gargano or Pete Dunne or Tommaso Ciampa or Finn Balor or Damian Priest and stuff like that, all those people just kind of move faster and swifter than him. You know, a lot of people talk about Karrion Kross. They've noticed like maybe his footwork isn't the best, which, I mean, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not a wrestler, so I can't criticize that. And, you know, for the most part, I feel like the people that have been criticizing that have no room to talk about it. But, you know, to each is their own. If you want to try and criticize that, I mean, accept people's responses to your criticism, I guess. And the same way I'll accept responses to my opinions and criticism here. So leave them in the comment section below. Cheap plug there. But, yeah, definitely Karrion Kross being included, and especially being in the title picture super quickly, definitely might have put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth, especially since Keith Lee had just won the NXT Championship, and then he just lost it, like, super quickly. I'm sure a lot of people were very pissed off about that. Moving on, once again, the visuals of NXT changed. They got a new set design. Instead of having the flat screen, they have like the big X for NXT on the stage now. They have the new arena at the CWC, and this is another small thing that changed about NXT, but it was something that kind of turned me off a little bit, was the camera angle changing from one side of the arena to the other. Normally, with NXT, they would have the main camera, the hard cam, as they say. The hard cam would usually be on the side of the arena, where the entrance ramp would be on the right side of your screen. Then they changed it to where the entrance ramp would be on the left side of your screen, just like Raw or SmackDown, which I always liked that NXT's hard cam was on the opposite side, just because it gave it that small bit of personality of being kind of the opposite or the mirror image of Raw and SmackDown. But when they changed it, it kind of just took that away, where it's just like, okay, we are definitely going to be setting you all up to be on live TV, and you guys are all going to learn how to wrestle towards this side of the arena instead of the other. So that definitely was a pretty big change. And then more recently, they had the new entrance theme for the show done by Poppy, and then they did these like new logo designs and graphic designs where like it's a big like gray X or whatever with like the NXT logo in front of it, and there's like metal wings and a skull and stuff like that. I really don't like the most recent logos of NXT. I think I might have talked about that in like a takeover review or something like that. I'm just not a big fan, you know. It just kind of screams like, you know, we're metal, yo, and stuff like that. It just seems like they're trying too hard to be cool. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people have said this in the past about NXT logos and stuff like that. Some people say the NXT logos haven't been good since like the days of Seth Rollins and Big E and stuff like that, and the Wyatt family. You know, some people may think that. Some people may think the logos haven't been good since the NXT game show days. Who knows? But it's just this most recent set of NXT logos just doesn't really hit home with me. I don't know. I just think they look a little bit like they're trying too hard. You know, I just feel like they should maybe try and go back to more simple logos. I don't know. Sometimes simple is better. Maybe not with Raw and SmackDown's logos. Maybe SmackDown's. Maybe Raw's might be a little bit too plain. But yeah, NXT's logos seemed fine. It just seemed like they were changing them just for the matter and for the fact of changing them because they wanted to. Whew. Sorry, had to take a drink. Talking for half an hour straight definitely can put some strain on your throat. But as we continue on, I have another note here about something that really annoyed me. And I don't know how the majority of online fans reacted to this. And it's when NXT introduced their own set of women's tag team titles. It was after a matchup with Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai versus Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax. And the ending to that match was so horrible. Because they had a Raw referee come in and basically screw over Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai and helping Nia and Shayna retain the titles. And what came out of it was William Regal saying, I'm going to create my own set of tag team titles. I just think that is probably the worst decision that NXT has ever made in recent years. And it's not just NXT's fault, but it's definitely WWE main's fault, because they basically say, we don't want to give the tag team titles to NXT, so we're just going to have you make your own set. Even though the WWE tag team titles don't do shit on Raw or SmackDown. The NXT women's tag team titles, and I remember making a separate video about this, talking about this, they are so unnecessary. I just don't get why they didn't just let Raquel and Dakota Kai win the women's tag team titles from WWE. You know, the whole thing about the women's tag team titles was that they were able to float from NXT to Raw to SmackDown through all that. And when you give NXT its own set of women's tag team titles, not only does it cut off the potential challengers and crossover appeal from Raw and SmackDown to NXT, but it also bloats out the amount of titles in WWE when there are already so many titles in WWE. Like, if you include NXT and NXT UK and 205 Live, which I'm surprised is still a thing, there are just so many titles. There's the WWE title, the Universal title, the United States title, the Intercontinental title, 2 sets of tag team belts, 2 sets of women's tag team belts, 2 sets of women's titles, actually 3 sets of women's titles, 4 sets of women's titles if you're counting NXT and NXT UK, and that means 3 sets of men's tag team titles if you're counting NXT UK, and then there's the 24/7 title, and then there's the Cruiserweight title. It's just, and now recently you have the $1 Million Championship added back in. It's just so many titles to keep track of. It just becomes way too much. I just don't get why they added another title belt. And now, even though NXT has done really, really well with their women's tag team titles, every time I see them on TV, I just think that they are so unnecessary. And it just reminds me of when they created them and how that is, in my eyes, the worst decision NXT has ever made in recent years, is introducing those tag team title belts. But like I said, it's not just NXT's fault. It's not NXT's fault, really. It's WWE main's fault for basically telling them that we're not ever going to give you these WWE tag team titles. You're going to have to make your own. And it was just... I want to move on. I don't want to talk about that anymore. We're going to move on, and we're going to jump time. We're going to jump forward in time to around this time now. It's around June, July in 2021. NXT is getting its fans back in the building. They still have the plexi wall around, which I actually like the plexi wall. I think the banging on the plexi wall sounds really cool. It's kind of getting it more back into that sort of underground vibe, that even though it is on the USA Network, you know, you got the people banging on the glass behind some chain fence. I think that looks cool, aesthetically and sound-wise. But speaking of sound, at first, like I said, the NXT fans were back in the building, but at first they weren't as loud and active as they used to be. And I feel like a factor of that is the fact that crowds have been gone for so long. Maybe it's just the fact that people are still adjusting to being back in a public setting again, cheering and screaming around other people again like they used to be. And I noticed it especially at NXT TakeOver In Your House 2021. They were so silent throughout that entire show. Like, I can only think of a few times where the crowd really felt like it was alive or felt like a TakeOver crowd. And when a TakeOver crowd is as silent as like a Raw or a SmackDown or a 205 Live in front of a big audience, if a TakeOver crowd is that quiet, then it ruins the whole show. And I've heard a lot of people talk about TakeOver In Your House 2021 being a bad TakeOver because of the crowd. Sorry, I had to burp a little bit. You know, I'm looking at this from really just my opinions now and kind of my view on the whole situation. One major thing that has made me change my mind about NXT and has made me less hyped to watch the show is the realization of what's to come for for the wrestlers after they leave NXT and go to Raw or SmackDown. And it's just the same song and dance time and time again. I've seen my favorite wrestlers from NXT move to Raw or SmackDown and be misused, unnecessarily changed, buried, wasted, among other stuff. And after a while, I've stopped saying I can't wait to see them on Raw or SmackDown, and instead I've been begging, please don't leave. And there are countless examples of it coming up recently, especially in the last year. Dominik Dijakovic, Mia Yim, Slapjack, I forgot his name for a second, Shane Thorne, Damian Priest, Keith Lee, sort of Matt Riddle for a little while, but I feel like they have him in a good place now. It's just insanity. Even just most recently, Karrion Kross just recently debuted on Raw, and he lost to Jeff Hardy in 2 minutes. It's just madness, and it goes back even further than that. Finn Balor, Shinsuke Nakamura, Bobby Roode. Just so many great wrestlers from NXT coming to Raw or SmackDown, only to be just torn apart and ruined and watered down. And some of them have left since then. Andrade, Aleister Black, The Revival, they've all gone on to do better things. And it's madness how they were so good in NXT, and then they went to Raw or SmackDown, and they became so crap. And then as soon as they leave WWE and they go to another place like AEW, they immediately become as exciting as they were in NXT. And I get that excitement for seeing them again, but it just kind of sucks that I don't have that feeling of like how it was in NXT. I don't know. That's just a very big issue, and I'm sure it's a big issue that a lot of people have now with NXT. Is just you can't really get excited or get invested in these characters anymore. It's because you know the inevitable is going to happen when they go to Raw or SmackDown. It's just annoying to think about. Moving on, I mentioned FTR and Aleister Black, Malachi Black, and Andrade leaving WWE and going to AEW. I do want to mention that AEW is another big factor in this situation. Now, before AEW existed, whenever I had a favorite independent wrestler or a wrestler that I watched and liked that was from Impact Wrestling or Ring of Honor or New Japan back in like 2019, 2018, and so on and so forth, back then, whenever I would talk about them or think about them or hear about their contract being up soon, I would always think like, and I would always hear talk and see talk online like, when do you think they'll be signed with NXT? Or do you think they'll be signed with NXT? Or rumors say they're probably going to be signed with NXT. And when they did get signed by NXT and they would show up in the crowd at a takeover, it was presented as a big deal and everyone would go crazy and be super excited for it. But then once AEW started up, the talk and discussion started to become more of, do you think they'll sign with AEW? And not, do you think they'll sign with NXT? Partially because a lot of people knew, from my last point, a lot of people knew that if they signed with NXT, eventually they would end up on Raw or SmackDown and be ruined. And for a lot of people, including myself, seeing all these independent wrestlers and seeing that their contracts were coming up, I started to lean more towards the side of I want them to sign with AEW rather than wanting to sign with NXT, because I just knew that if they signed with NXT, the inevitability would come that they go to Raw or SmackDown and they would be ruined. So I will admit, there are a lot of wrestlers that I would usually say I can't wait to see them in NXT. When AEW came around, I would start saying I really hope they sign with AEW. And now whenever I have a favorite independent wrestler, like I said, I want to see them go to NXT or to AEW and build that brand instead of signing with NXT. And in a few cases, especially recently, I have been kind of disappointed to see. I never thought I would be disappointed to see some people sign with NXT. I think the main examples that I would probably give for this would be Taya Valkyrie and Priscilla Kelly. And that was mainly just because I feel like AEW needs to get a lot more, like, really great women's wrestlers on their roster. And Taya Valkyrie, I feel like, would be a really great one. Although I guess it kind of makes sense that she goes to NXT, considering her husband John Morrison is in WWE. Priscilla Kelly, I don't really know. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the wrestlers' decisions on where they sign. But if the majority of your fans want to see you wrestle in a certain place, I feel like that would be taken into account at least a little bit. But like I said, it's the wrestlers' decisions at the end of the day. I can't speak on behalf of the wrestlers. I don't think anybody deserves to speak on behalf of the wrestlers unless the wrestlers have given them permission to do so. So, yeah, that's just kind of a small thing. It's just AEW becoming a factor of giving wrestlers that are great an opportunity to go to a place where you know that they're going to be able to flourish and show off what they can do and have no limitations, or at least have a lot less limitations, I would say, and just, you know, be able to be themselves and be awesome. And, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of stuff is just piled on, and NXT has been in such a strange place, like I said, since the move to the USA Network, especially since COVID started, and with all the stuff, like creative differences and some characters not connecting and random stuff happening, and the inclusion of AEW and this Wednesday Night Wars and an audience missing. A lot of factors have kind of just brought NXT down in quality over the past year or two for me personally. And now hopefully that audiences are back. Hopefully they'll get loud. Hopefully once takeovers are allowed to be in the bigger arenas, hopefully we'll start getting those bigger takeover reactions, and hopefully NXT can get back and reach the new heights and reach the heights of old and start being the NXT that I really, really enjoyed back in 2018 and 2019 and around that time especially. But, you know, 2019, 2020, 2021, NXT, it's still good. I definitely do still watch it. It's still really good. It's just a lot feels missing. A lot feels lost. A lot feels watered down. And like I said, and like I've gone throughout this entire rant, this over 40-minute rant, there's a lot of stuff that's piled on, and I just really hope that this brand that I've done reviews for ever since NXT TakeOver Philadelphia, I just really hope this brand can find its footing again and become as good as it once was, and then some. That's all I hope. So is NXT still good? Yes. Is it as good as it was before COVID or before the USA Network? I would argue no. It's not as good. Some stuff is missing, some stuff needs to be fixed, and some stuff just needs to be like it used to be. And if it starts as small stuff like camera angles and stuff like that, or just getting the crowd to be excited again, then I'll definitely take that as a small victory. But I guess we'll just see what happens. But let me know in the comment section below. I'm recording this right now. It is 12:30 a.m. I just did that long-ass rant. I'm about to chug down this Mountain Dew and get to editing this and getting it up as soon as possible. But I just want to hear your guys' thoughts, you know, in the comments. Like I said, be kind, but also I understand if you guys want to be very critical. Just give me your thoughts. Do you think NXT is still good? Do you agree with any of my points? Let me know in the comment section below. And thank you for listening. If you made it this far, it's been a lot for me to record on my voice, and I'm sure it's been a lot for you guys to listen to. So, hey, I raise my soda can to you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you guys again later.